So apologies for getting you guys come here on false pretenses. I'll sort of explain why you're not going to be hearing about planar depth in a bit. But I wanted to start with sort of, first of all, to sort of thanks for the invite. Thanks for getting me here and things like that. And to say that I've really had an amazing 2 weeks here, and it's been really, really fun. And one of the striking things about this place, at least for me, is the really wonderful atmosphere that's here in the department and around. And I think that's, it would be very surprising to me if that wasn't extremely conducive to good exchanges of ideas and make sort of the mathematics that's coming out of here better than it would be otherwise. And as far as I understand from listening yesterday, this is Sunder's doing, and you did a good job. And it's very unusual to find anywhere a place as sort of collegial and friendly. And thanks to all the various people who sort of brought me out into the big city while I was here and showed me different things. It's really been a lovely, lovely time. So let's see. I wanted to start, before I get to the actual politics, I wanted to start by sort of talking about Sundar and I's relationship, and sort of started from chronologically as best I can. So I was thinking back to when I first met him, and I realized that I had a photograph of our first meeting. It was a nice time together. There it is. I don't know if you can see, that's Sundar on the right. He looks a little different now, but that's what he looked like. Yeah, that's me on the left, and we were sharing a beer. And that initially, sort of our relationship developed since then, but I have to say that first meeting, it was somewhat of a one-sided affair. I did most of the drinking, and he wasn't listening to me. I mean, I would sort of say things to him. He didn't really respond at all. But since then, our relationship sort of blossomed, and it became more than just this two-dimensional relationship. And so here's the thing about mathematics, at least for me, which is that there are nice ideas and there are nice expositions, but every once in a while you come across something that somehow touches something that's further inside you. And I don't quite know what it is, but it's somehow the combination of those things makes you, I don't know, it's evocative of emotions. And I haven't run into it all that often, but I have run into it with Sundar's stuff, which I was exposed to before I actually met the man. And I have to say that in the subsequent years of hanging out with you and having a relationship with you, that somehow those emotional things have sort of transferred to or have been mirrored in our relationship. And I think the wonderful thing, and I think it was touched upon yesterday in terms of various forms, but something that's really striking about Sundar is that if you look at his face and you're interacting with him, the emotions that are expressed on his face are like a wave that kind of hits you. And so when he's joy or pleasure about something is something that kind of bowls you over. And I was sort of listening to some of his former students talk about the opposite sets of emotions. And I have to say that I have never seen a better look of either frustration or disdain than what comes out of Sundar's face when he said, and I don't know whether that's some sort of classical dance training, like we saw last week, of expressing emotions on your face, but anyway, it's quite impressive. Quite an impression. So, so that got to me thinking, along with various people's recollections of Sundar before I knew him. There's a lot of people who've known him much longer than I, but of this French beard and this sort of. And so I started thinking, here's this expressive person. I wonder what did he look like? What did he look like when he was younger? And so I had no way of doing that, and I was here. But I'm relatively internet savvy, and so I had a good idea, which was I was going to do a Google image search to sort of see what the pre-bearded Sundar might look like. So I did a Google image search, VS Sundar, and I came up with a very surprising result, which is I'm surprised that none of the people who claim to have known him since he was a child sort of really said anything about this version of V.S. Sundar, which appears as the picture. And I just, I mean, what's really amazing is is that really, I don't know how you did this, Sundar, but how you turned from that as a 20-year-old into the handsome man that you are now, I don't quite know how you managed to pull that off, but it's everybody has benefited from that transformation. And in addition to, I was sort of very impressed with all these people who knew Sundar for much longer than I, but I felt like I really need to say that I have some claim that most people here don't have, which is I spent a year living with Sundar, which I don't think everybody else can say that for sure. And I put living with quotes because it needs a little backstory. This is a picture of my younger daughter, Simone. And this was about the age that I was living with Sundar. And so this is kind of pretty good. It's a picture about water that's about 65 degrees Fahrenheit, so not warm. And on a day that's maybe 65, 70 degrees. And this is what she'll do. She'll just, she doesn't say much, but she'll just kind of go after things in this way. And so this is about this time. I was at home and I was doing dishes, and so I was doing the dishes over here and she was over there, and I asked her whether she was hungry. She was sitting on the floor, I think. I asked her when she was hungry. And what came out of her mouth, I'm not sure if I can really reproduce it, but it was a rather shocking thing that came out of her mouth. She said, so I said, "Are you hungry?" And she wasn't speaking very much, and she went, let's see if I can get it right. It's something like this. And for me, I had only heard that type of expression multiple times, but one other times before. So I was looking this way, right? And she was on the floor, and she just said, And this is what flashed into my brain. So I turned around, and there was that. And I was thinking, what I just heard. So that went on for a full year, because for a full year, that was how she expressed herself in her most brutal forms. Just really very comfortably going, here and there. So it was really this is a very pleasant way of living. Much more pleasant than I would say that would be. So after that year, I felt much closer to Sundar, and he visited various times, and I was sort of thinking about it over those times. And Shami had mentioned that there were these rumors out there about Sundar, sort of engaging in some alcoholic consumption while doing math, and he sort of assured us that that was not the case. Now, I can say, regardless of that fact, that shooting pool and consuming alcohol is a very different story, and that consuming alcohol while shooting pool is something that Sundar can do quite well, and so well that I remember a particular incident where we went along and we were playing some pool, and I fancy myself a decent pool player, and there's Sundar literally staggering around the table, sort of to the various things with his stick, and he would get to, I don't know if you know these, have you ever seen these documentaries of these surgeons with Tourette's syndrome? So they have these uncontrollable movements, right? But then they actually do perform surgery, and the thing is that, though they're just before, going like this, at the moment that they do surgery, so they can do these precise motions. So I always felt like I was in one of those documentaries watching him, because he was sort of stumbling around and sort of doing these things, and he would get down and he would line up a shot, and stabilize himself, and boom, just right in. And I have to say, you were a really sore winner in that situation, because by the time we were leaving, he puts his arm on my shoulder and he says, well, we had to walk about a block to a car, and he says, if you don't mind, I'm just going to lean on you, because I don't really think I could sort of make it to the car in the most direct manner possible. So anyway, I don't know how that applies to anything that I'm about to talk about next, but I thought I'd share that. And I was talking to my dad and my mom, and so Henry and Julie wish you a very, very happy 60th. And my dad reminded me of the story when Sundar came to visit in New York, and we had arranged he reminded me of the story that he had arranged to, I was going to pick him up at the airport, but he said, well, the plane may not be on time, and then there's customs and all this stuff, so why don't I just call from the airport? And this was way before cell phones or anything like that. And so I'm sitting in my parents' house, and I failed to tell my parents the details of the process of how this was going to work out. They knew Sundar was coming and that I was going to pick him up and whatever, but my dad was doing something else and he was running around. And I don't know if you have this here, but in America, if you have a phone number for long enough, the telemarketers get to it. And so you get these endless calls for people calling you to try to sell you something. And the feature of these calls that you learn very quickly is that these people who are telemarketing are sort of calling several people at once because most people don't answer the phone. And so then when somebody picks up, their screen lights up and they sort of have to reorient themselves and figure out who it is they're talking to and get their speech ready. And so typically when you pick up the phone and you say hello, there's this long pause, or not so long pause, but like a second pause or so. And so if you're used to this happening, what you do is you pick up the phone, you say hello, and when you see this long pause, you hang up the phone. So the phone rings in the house, and my dad picks up the phone, says hello, nothing, hangs up the phone. So phone rings again about 2 minutes later, and picks up the phone. Hello, nothing happened. He's getting more and more irritated. And so then sort of third time, because usually they don't call back right away. So third time he picks up the phone, and I was in some other room, and he's very mad, and he sort of hangs up the phone again, and he storms off. And I said, well, who was that? And he was like, oh, some telemarketer. And I said, are you sure? I mean, did they ask for anything? No, it just, that pause. And I said, well, Sundar is planning to call from the airport. And he sort of looks at me and he says, what? I said, Sundar is planning to call from the airport. And just then the phone rang again. So he picked up the phone. And rather confused and exasperated, this time I picked up the phone, and exasperated Sundar sort of said, hello? And so we finally managed to make that connection. But we had realized but my dad pointed out that even if he had listened to the phone, this is another feature of the telemarketers, is many of the calls for telemarketers actually come from call centers in India. And so that had he actually even picked up the phone, there might have still been some confusion over what exactly was being sold to him and not, rather than arranging for a taxi pickup at the airport. So anyway, so that brings us to our current state of affairs, which is that Sundar has been trying to get me to come this way. He's been doing all the traveling for ages. And for ages, he sends out this lovely invitation. I say, yes, maybe, well, I don't know, I'm not sure. But this time, for a 60th, in my mind, I committed to coming. And so I said so. But in Sundar's mind, this was exactly the same response I had always given him for everything. And so about 2 weeks before I asked Vijay for the number of or the name or the address of the guest house, because I needed to put that on my visa. And apparently Vijay betrayed me by telling this to Sundar. And this is the email I got. Vijay informs me that as of yesterday you hadn't even applied for a visa. For God's sake, will you get off and get your visa, tickets, etc. We have barely 2 weeks before you are supposed to start lecturing here, and whatever you do not underestimate Indian bureaucracy. Hoping to see you before too long. Fondly but exasperatedly sooner. Now, I consider this to be my great moral victory, which is, we've all heard about Sundar's preciseness with the English language and writing. And I had got him so exasperated that I produced this out of him. So I was sort of feeling both anxious and pleased with my effect, and so I responded like this, which I thought was a reasonable response. I've talked to the visa people another time. They assured me I'm planning. Does this alleviate some of your exasperation, or am I just being naive? I got this response. No and yes, meaning no, it doesn't alleviate its exasperation, and yes, I am being naive. And he quotes our government offices are well known for saying, but we assumed you would know that you have to produce a notarized copy of the dog license of your grandmother's fourth dog. So, anyway, since I felt like I was on solid ground, since as far as I knew, we were not pet owners. And so when I came here, I've got to say, just coming here has been so lovely. And one of the things that sunk in, which I hadn't sunk in before, which is that I met Sundar in his office the first day, and he was just sort of glowing. He was glowing, and I realized that, and we started talking about various things, that he had just finished an entry in either the newspaper or his blog, and I just want to make sure that one of the things that's nice about when I don't see him very often is I get to see a piece of him by this blog. And I'm not sure everybody knows about this blog, but anyway, I wanted to make sure whoever doesn't know about it does now. So it's wonderful to sort of read what you're up to, and it's also lovely to think about how pleased you are with the effect that it's having, and it's great to hear the stories about that. So finally to this talk. I figured I could maybe talk for 40 minutes without actually saying anything, but that's not actually true. So it sort of occurred to me in the middle of preparing my talk that this is Sundar's 60th birthday. This is not anybody else's birthday. It's Sundar's 60th birthday. Why in the world on your 60th birthday would you want to hear about a result that you already know? So I asked him that particular fact. I mean, some people would, right? There's some people who want to bathe in the glory of all their past things. But as far as I know, this is not this person. And so I asked him, well, would you like to hear something you already know, or should I tell you something that you don't know or might not know? And he said, yes, tell me something that I might not know. And so I said, even if it involves redistricting and politics? And he said, no, that sounds fine. And I recalled that, in fact, he has some interest in politics, at least in passing, because on November 5th, 2008, which was the day after the day after the US presidential election, he sent me this very short note. I hadn't heard from him in quite a long time, but the following. So he certainly has some interest in politics, and so that's where we're starting. So finally, we will get going with the actual talk. So let me sort of give you a brief sort of background about how the U.S. or the piece of the U.S. politics that you need to know, which is this is the map of the United States. The United States are divided into, as the name suggests, states. Let's see. So that's California over here. That's where I live now. I grew up over here, or the 27 in New York, but just on that little tip over there somewhere. All these states, the U.S. Congress, the body of thing that passes laws, has two pieces. They have a Senate and a House. And the Senate has 2 representatives from each state, but the House has representatives proportional to the population. So for instance, California, which is a very populous state, has 53 representatives as opposed to, let's say, Oregon, which has 5. And they do this by population. They take the census every 10 years. They divide it up into their fixed number of seats, 430 something, and they divide it up. But with the additional condition that even if you have less population than what you would amount to 1 seat, you automatically get 1 seat. So you think of all these places as being very, very rural places with not very much density. And anyway, here's the thing. How you get representatives, these 53 representatives, is not based on the statewide election. Each of these 53 representatives, for instance, have won small elections out of little pieces of the state. So the state is carved off into little pieces called districts. And then in each district, people run as the representative. They have to live in the district to run, and they run as a district member. So as you can imagine, there is some issue around how to draw these lines for these districts. Because depending on how you draw might affect the balance of power within a district. And so that's the question we're going to talk about. How does drawing these lines, which is called redistricting, affect things? And you might think, well, these lines have been existed for ages and ages and ages, and so there's no question nobody ever redraws them. But in fact, every 10 years they do a new census, and sometimes, the population shifts from one place to another, and so California may have only 52 representatives the next time around, and somebody else has something. So that means these 53 regions have to be redrawn into 52 regions, and this happens all over the place. So every 10 years, and also within the regions, they try to break it up into reasonably the same size population. So based on that, they have to shift lines every 10 years. And so that's the process of redistricting. And you can imagine that some strange things end up happening because politicians get involved in drawing these maps. So here is a map of, I think this is Nevada. And these are the districts within Nevada. And take a look at District 2. Right, so the people who elect District 2 include these people, but nobody outside here, just this narrow strip, and then these people and these people. Right? So you can see that something is amok, right? Something's amiss. And this is ancient thing called gerrymandering, for those of you who haven't heard of it, named after somebody who originally did this in 1912, the Massachusetts governor. But here's another example. This is Illinois. And take a look at number 17. So it sort of goes down here and goes down here and has a little bit in here. Right? So there's some crazy stuff going on. Now, why is there some crazy stuff going on? And the reason is where boundaries drawn makes a difference. So if you have a population of the whole state where the people you want to vote has X% of the population, if you're allowed to freely move people around and draw the districts any way you want, you can actually arrange to win 2 times X percentage of the vote. So if you had 30% of the vote, you could win 60% of the seats. And the way that you do this is pretty clear. It's right. You pack it in so that in any district you win just barely with your 30%, and then all the other districts you lose really, really badly. So in the districts that you're going to lose, you pump as much of the other person's population in, and then you sort of make a close call in the way you use, and that's how you get up to 2x from x, is by doing this process. And of course, you can't get more than 100. And so that's in theory you can do that, and in practice, in fact, people do. And so here's 2 examples. The most notable case recently was in 2002, where somebody did it sort of overtly in a time when there wasn't actually a thing. And here is the result of the difference. The previous vote was 15 Republicans and 17 Democrats. And this was redrawn by the Republicans. And the outcome of this vote, now it's unreasonable to think that this attitude's changed very much in 2 years, where people moved population in 2 years. So it's not a result of just changing ideas. But the result was that the Republicans picked up 7 seats, okay, out of a total of 32. That's not a bad thing to sort of pull off. And here in Michigan, the same redistricting is sort of a lesser thing. And notice in this case, 7 plus 9 doesn't add up to 9 plus 6, and that's because Michigan, that was a year of the census, and their population went down, so they had to redraw to get 15 instead of 16 districts. And the result was that 7 Republicans and 9 Democrats turned into 9 Republicans and 6 Democrats. And in both these, and I want to point out that in either of these cases, one might say that the transformation this way is what's sort of bad, but it's arguable in Michigan and elsewhere. It's arguable. It may be that the Democrats got the upper hand before and redrew this way, and so that it's actually undoing some bad districting. So I'm going to be agnostic about what's going on, and just to use this as an example of, look, where you draw lines makes a difference, regardless of which is the right and which is the wrong. And in fact, the problem is there is no real easy answer of what's right and wrong. Justice Souter, who was a Supreme Court justice, had this to say, which was the increasing efficiency of partisan redistricting has damaged the democratic process to a degree that our predecessors only began to imagine. And so I'm going to present here a sort of a solution to this problem. And let's see. I have lost track of time. How much time do I have? 15 minutes. Okay. All right. So, so how is the redistricting drawn currently? It's usually drawn by the states and the state legislature with the governor. And so when the state's legislature locally is all in a single party, in the United States there are really only 2 parties, the Democrats and the Republicans. And if there's a sort of if there's some balance within the state legislature, then oftentimes there's sort of some horse trading and various things work out, not so controversially. But in the case where everybody is from the same, the majorities are all from the same party, then you can get some pretty good shenanigans going on. And I should say that there are some judicial and legislative constraints about how districts are drawn. They're supposed to be about the same size or exactly the same size. There's some notion of contiguous, right, that you can't actually just plop 2 people without connecting. That's why there are these connecting lines in that picture before. There are these sort of narrow connecting lines. But it's not very well put. I mean, there aren't very well. The attempt is to make the blocks, or the theory is around making voting blocks that sort of have common interests. So you would sort of put people in a region that have common interests so that one representative could sort of represent the region reasonably well. Okay, so now let me tell you something about fair division, which is what we're the area of mathematics that we're going to sort of borrow from. So here's the basic question in fair division. Here's a cake. To me, it doesn't look particularly appetizing, but anyway. Picture trying to divide this cake among people where what they like is different. So maybe I like the purple stuff. It's really, really great. Where somebody else likes the frosting. It's really, really great. Now, I could cut it in such a way so that every piece looks exactly the same, right? And then no two people would be unhappy. They all got each a little piece. But the idea is that actually there's room for something better, right? If I don't like frosting but like the middle part, and you like frosting but don't like the middle part, if we knew that, we could get really, really happy by me giving you all the frosting and taking all the rest. Right? This is the idea that we don't have the same preferences. And fair division deals exactly with this question, how to divide up resources where you have a different measure of preferences and how to get to solutions that you're both happy with. And one possible idea of solution that you're both happy with is envy-free. And envy-free means that you look at everybody else's piece and you say, I got the best one, or at least I got at least as good as the best one. Right? And it turns out, remarkably enough, that this is possible, that with a bunch of people and a different set of preferences with very low assumptions on those preferences, it is possible to divide up things in such a way that everybody is happy in this notion of envy-free. So there's this notion, I'll just sort of say that there's this notion of I want to stress multilateral evaluation, which just means two different people might have different views about what's good and what's bad. And, okay, so let's get back to redistricting. So the first thing you do, so imagine you're the independent judge or somebody who's going to try to carve up the districts and be fair, right? Not be partisan, but be fair. What being fair means is not so easy to define, right? So here's why. Right? A reasonable first thought is say, oh, okay, so the Republicans, let's say, have a 45% vote in the state, and the Democrats have a 55%. So let's try to make it so that a reasonable and fair thing would be that 45% of the districts are won by Republicans and 55% are won by Democrats. So that by the time you represent in the House, the percentage of each party is the same as the voting percentage. But the point is that that actually isn't possible, okay, necessarily, based on geometric constraints. So imagine a very closely divided state, 52-48, where people are homogeneously mixed. So imagine that it's just like a checkerboard of people, or sort of static of people, so that I live next to people who are very ideologically opposite from me and stuff. Then any small region that you pick, what's the population going to look like? It's going to reflect exactly the same thing, right? Every small region you take will be about 52-48. And there's no way, and so that would mean the 52 would win every district, right? It would win 100% of the things. And there's no way to force them not to if the population is mixed up this way and if I'm supposed to group people contiguously, right? Because it's just sort of, so that's just what this said. So this would yield 100 to 0% in districts. And one should argue that that would be the right thing to happen, right? Because that is really, if we want to represent people geographically, that is the only possible solution, that the 52%ers win most of the districts. So this is just to point out that there are these geometric constraints. And so this initial idea of percentage of districts won being proportional to the population is just not right. It's not a right idea of fairness. Right? And so we need some sort of incorporation of fairness that includes geometric constraints. And so, okay, so we're going to embark upon that definition. So first of all, we need a little terminology. So first of all, a viable division will be you're going to take a state and you're going to divide it up. A viable division is any division, guess if you were an individual before the vote happened, your best guess as to how people will vote. Okay, and now let's sort of, I also want to put some definitions about how preferences, and I'm going to call a rating system R, a number indicating how desirable each viable division is. So I present you a map. Imagine you're a Republican Party member or representative who's making this decision. I present you a map of how things are divided up. You have some idea of how much you like this map. Right? So that's going to be your rating system. And for each map, you'll have a rating system. And I'm going to specify a particular one, which is R-win, which is going to be your prediction based on your voting model for how many seats you actually won, how many districts you actually win. Okay? Now, you might say, well, of course that's what would be. All you want to do is count up how many that you are going to win. But in fact, that's not actually the case. Sorry, that's not actually the case because sometimes you might want to, there might be some wins that are more valuable than other wins. So there are certain districts, and I'll get to that for a second, but let's just call our win a win. And an additive rating system is going to be one where you rate each, if you look at a map and you have these districts, you're going to decide, you're going to have a number associated to each district. Maybe that's the percentage chance that you think it's going to win, your expected chance of winning, or whatever it is. But it's a rating system according to, and I want an additive rating system to be one that sort of is locally defined that way, so that you add up your ratings for the individual districts to decide on your rating of the map as a whole. And so I want to just sort of carve why our win isn't necessarily what you might like. Is first of all that some districts are more valuable than others due to incumbent committee placement. So once people are elected into office, they sort of raise in the ranks within Congress, and they can be very influential when they're on committees. And so you might have over here somebody who's on some very influential committee, and somebody over here who's just running for the first time. And a win over here for you as a party is much better than a win over here. So you'd rather have this. And that would be an example where you would rate making sure this guy wins as more important than making sure this guy wins. So that would be an example where it's not our win. And there are a couple others, but I'm just not going to. I guess maybe let me point out the last one. Another one that's very valuable is if you can redraw a map so that two people who currently, of the opposing group, are currently in office, if you can stick them into the same district, that's really good for you, because only one of them is going to come out, right? Unless they're going to actually physically move houses, which is very unlikely because they're married with children and various other things. So that's another reason why you might rate even a district that you were losing, a map that had a district that you were losing, you might rate it quite highly just for that. So again, I'm trying to define what's fair, and so I wanted to take the geometry into it, and so here's the idea of a geometric target. So giving a voting model V, which is an idea of how you're going to vote, and a rating system R, your own preferences. Okay? Here's a geometric target with respect to V and R. Okay? It's going to be the average of the highest and lowest ratings among all viable divisions. So you imagine saying, suppose I had complete control of the map according to my rating system, what would be the best thing for me? And whatever the rating for that would be the highest. And then you imagine that your arch nemesis is doing it, who knows exactly what you're doing, and what would be the worst for you. And that's your lowest, and you take the average of those two. Okay. And we'll call the absolute geometric target, which is not, so this is according to, this geometric target is for between you and your prediction of the model and your rating system. And we'll call it the absolute geometric target, the one where we use the actual post-voting map, and we'll use the target R win. We don't have to, but that's what we'll call the absolute. So the features of this is that it incorporates geometric constraints. It also produces a viable target. Okay? Whereas previous ideas of fairness, you might not be able to do it based on geographic constraints. But built into this definition is that you can achieve something within this range. Okay. And when there are no geometric constraints, right, if you just sort of pictured I could allow everybody to move anywhere. Now let me calculate what this thing turns out to be. When there are no geometric constraints, this turns out to be the proportional to the vote. So if there was 52-48 and you could move anybody around, this turns out to be, it would win you 50, the geometric target would be 52% for the people who had winning 52% of the seats if you had 52% of the vote. And similarly for the 48% would produce 48. Okay, so what I'm about to describe achieves this. So it allows you to get both parties to get their geometric target, or just about their geometric target. So let me explain how this works. Okay. So this is very similar to if you have a cookie between two people. Let me just describe this. It's called a moving knife procedure. If you are an adult who has two children, this is a very helpful thing to know, which is you have a cookie or something like that, and you want to divide it fairly, and you don't want to have and your children are not able to do the, you divide and you choose. Here's the way to do it, though it is a little bit time consuming, is you take a knife and you slide it over and you tell each kid when, tell each kid that they should yell stop as soon as they like the piece that's getting bigger. Right. So let me see if I can just quickly do this. So you have a cookie, right, and you have a knife, and you start to move it this way. Right? So at the beginning, both kids will prefer this side, presumably. Right? And you slide this knife along and you say, tell me stop when you prefer this piece. And so the first person who says stop gets this piece. And so that's the incentive, right? So did you understand how that would work? So the first person who says stop gets the left piece. The person who would remain silent gets the remaining piece. And if you think about what that does is you'll say stop if you want. It's sort of a balanced thing that as soon as your value of both pieces are about the same is when you should say stop. Because if you wait any longer and the other person says stop, you end up losing out and getting less than 50% of what you value things to be. So this is the exact idea that we're going to go here, but it's a little bit subtler, which is you go to the two parties and you present a line and you say, I'll give you the choice. Either you get to divide up this side, but your arch nemesis gets to divide up that side into districts, or the opposite. And you tell me, I've offered you up this line, you tell me which you would prefer. So both parties tell which they prefer. If they ever differ, okay, if they ever say, I would like to, if they ever would say, if party B says, yes, I would like to divide up this part as opposed to that part, and party A says, I would like to do it, then you say, okay, go do your worst. Go divide up. And so this party A will do what they want to do over here, and party B will do what they want to do over here. Okay. And so let's sort of think. So then, and suppose they both say, no, both people want to divide up this side, right? Like little children, right? So then you start to move the line over, and you do the same thing. It's an independent person who does the initial line, just like a parent. So. How you do it? You do it. So essentially, there's one constraint on this line that you want, which is that you want the amount of population over here and the amount of population over here to be sort of divisible by the basic unit of the thing. So you can't move it continuously. You have to jump it, but you can jump it. You can sort of pick your direction pretty much at random and then just avoid highways and lakes and things like that and draw your line right here. It's a pretty, relative to what else needs to be done, you can do it in a pretty random way. And so you'd start off with a line that just has one district on the left and all the remaining districts on the right. So at that point, you've already drawn the one district for the person. So everybody will prefer the right side. Right? So both parties will prefer the right side. By the time you've gotten to the other extreme of moving things across, right? By the time you've gotten to the other extreme, they all prefer the other side. Right? So at some point, they switched preferences. And if they disagreed the whole time with each other, they must have switched at the exact same moment between preferring the one side to preferring the other side. And so this is very important. If they switched at different times, somewhere between the two places where they switched was a place where they agreed that one of them wanted to divide up one side and one of them wanted to divide up the other side, at which point you just offer them up and they do it. Now remember, right, that these guys, this is, by the way, the Democrats are represented by donkeys and the Republicans by elephants for some reason. I don't quite know. But they had different preferences. So we're not all, they're not all, we can't independently figure out what they want. They have to say what they want. But that's what you do. And when you get to a point, if you get to a point where they always disagree, there is a moment when they both switch their allegiance from dividing up one side to dividing up that side. And that must be at a point, the idea is that must be at a point where their preferences are pretty weak, because you've only slid the line a little bit, and they've switched their allegiance from one side to the other. So what you do at that point is you just randomly assign them the two things. And the result is that one will be unhappy, but not that unhappy, because it was almost what they wanted. Right? And so let me just sort of do it. Let me just give you an example. Here's an example, and I'll try to finish up very quickly just with this example. But here's an example of imagine a state, and there are these sort of smaller districts. They're smaller regions. And what I'm trying to do is divide this. So this is because this region is small. All these regions are supposed to represent the same number, a block of population that's the same size. So U, for instance, is more like there's like a city over here because the density is bigger. Here are the suburbs, and here's the country, right? And so the task is to divide it up into 5 groups of 5, right? And let's assume that we know that this is how people are going to vote. So 47 of the one party A, 47% vote for party A here, 59% vote for party A here, et cetera, et cetera. And if you sort of do this calculation for this example, party A has a bare minimum majority. Right? So they have just a little bit of minimum majority. So let's see what happens with this thing. So first of all, let's analyze the targets. This is what they can expect to get. So here's what party A would do if it had complete control. Right? Here's an example. The bold lines represent, so this is a district, this is a district, this is a district, this is a district. And the gray ones represent ones they would win, and they would lose this one. So they've lost, you notice that this is one, they've packed this one to be things where they're really poorly represented, right? And so they've won 4 districts and lost 1, even though they only had 50%, 50.2% of the population. And here's the opposite extreme, right? Here's somebody who packed all the city dwellers together into one thing, and where that party had the majority, so they've only won 1 district in here. So the calculation of the geometric target then says, if I'm just counting wins, the best I can do is 4, the worst I can do is 1, so my average is what I'm shooting for, which is 2.5. Right? And so now if we go through the protocol, here's the set of splits. We're going to offer them this cut, then this cut, then that cut, then that cut. And for the first cut, the 2 choices, this is analyzed from party A's perspective, the 2 choices would be 2 wins for party A and 3 losses. And if they were allowed to divide up this side, and if they were allowed to divide up that side, 4 wins and 1 loss. Right? And now if we slide this over, it's 2 wins and 3 losses and 3 wins and 2 losses. And so they would prefer to divide up the right-hand side here. Right? And the second one, they still prefer to divide up the right-hand side. The third one, now they start to prefer the left-hand side. Right? Because there it gets them 3 wins, whereas the other gets them 2, and it just gets worse from there. So this is where the switch point happens. Right? Over here, they prefer to drive up the right side, whereas over here, they prefer to divide up the left side. So the algorithm would say, here are the 4 choices around the switch points. We'll assume the other person's really wanted the exact opposite. And so we flip a coin between these, and the point is that each of these divide you up at 3, 2. So one party gets 3, the other party gets 2, which is as close as you could get to this geometric target of 2.5 as you could, given that you can't win 2.5 districts. Okay? And so I guess I've run out of time, so I'll stop. But the real strength of this is that it has this, you might sort of somehow think that you're giving some party a false choice. If they have 80% of the vote, then they seem to be sharing the power equally with the other party in this process. Right? But actually that's not true, because just being able to draw the lines doesn't help you if you don't have the population. And in particular, it says that the choices that are being offered to you give you an opportunity to achieve something better than average. And the reason that is if I have this with the 2 choices where I get to divide up this and the other party gets to divide up that, or the other party gets to divide up this and I get to divide up that, think about the wins think about taking this map and taking this half of the map and putting it over here and put this half of the map over here. And what you've got here is your best possible map total, subject to this line. And what you've got here is some other map that's maybe your worst, or maybe not so bad. Right? And the average of these 2 outcomes includes the average of your best with something not possibly as bad as your worst, but that's at least your geometric target. So one of the 2 choices was at least as good as your target. So let me stop there, because I don't want to take up my time. But that's the result. It's sort of I took great pleasure in the following, which is that when proposing this result, I ended up in the land of political scientists. And political scientists, I'm going to make gross generalizations here, but it turns out it's a field that values speaking louder and intimidating other people. So basically, it's not that your ideas are necessarily better or worse, it's whether or not you can just get enough people on your side and intimidate the other people. And so for some reason I got embroiled without any doing on my part in a very one-sided exchange where I was sort of, the ideas of this paper were being attacked by people who actually had not read the paper. But this included the following statement, let's see if I can get this right. It is the nature of mathematicians to take old and discarded political science ideas and refashion them and call them their own, was the actual quote that was said. So there's much debate about friendliness and unfriendliness within various mathematical subjects, but I am happy to say that I am not a political scientist. And many happy returns, Cinder. It's really, really great to be here. And